Yes, hello, and welcome to Bio2040, where we interview thought leaders in the space of biomedical research, drug discovery, and we try to uncover the biggest bottlenecks as well as the biggest opportunities for people to come and learn and hopefully also work on and work together on solving some of these problems. And today I'm very excited to have Owen Roberts on the show. Owen is the CEO of two companies. One is NobleX Biotech, and the other one is M4K Pharma. And I've come across Owen because he's the M4K Pharma model is a pioneering, completely new approach to drug discovery in terms of they're doing a lot of their research in open science matters. So, Owen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction.
Yes, Owen, it's really great to have you on. I've been following you guys' efforts for a while. And today I'm very excited to learn more about how those are going and what challenges you're facing. But let's start off by introducing you to our audience real quick and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be the founder of M4K Pharma.
Sure. Happy to do so. Well, actually, my background's in finance. I'm a corporate finance executive from way back who more or less lost his way around the time of the biotech bubble in the early 2000s. I actually joined a company that became known as Affinium Pharmaceuticals back in 2000. I was one of the co-founders, and I was the head of finance for that company. And I joined assuming that listening into the story about the genomics and proteomics wave, and the human genome had just been fully sequenced, etc. So I joined this, told my wife that I'd be in it for about 2 years, and about 14 years later, we finally had an exit for Affinium, which was exciting for everyone involved, especially the people who stuck with us for 14 years. And since then, started up another company called NobleX as the CEO of me and some of the key executives from Affinium Pharmaceuticals. We started up NobleX, which is focused on the classic biotech model of developing and owning chemical matter, developing it forward and finding a use in this case, as an antibiotic. And then about a year ago, I was in conversation with an old colleague of mine, one of the founders of Affinium Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Alan Edwards here at the University of Toronto and with the Structural Genomics Consortium. And he had this strange idea to use open science to try and find ways of more efficiently discovering drugs and other therapeutics, and basically lowering the cost of healthcare for across the board for everyone. Now, for those of you who've had the pleasure of meeting Al Edwards at the Structural Genomics Consortium, you'll understand that Al can be a force of nature. And if you haven't had the pleasure to spend some time with Al, then you're truly missing out on someone who really gets excited about both science and the ways of commercializing and changing the way that science is done. So about a year ago, Al convinced me to work with him to start up this novel idea of using open science where you don't patent any of the initial composition of matter patents that are generally the bedrock of doing biotech and drug development, but rather doing it on an open science model where the information is shared broadly. And the idea being that this could be a more efficient way of looking at ways of developing and discovering cures for diseases. Now, I think Al has a very broad view of how this can be applied, but what convinced me to join him in this and his merry band of drug developers was the idea that if we take a narrower view of this and try and develop an experiment whereby we see if this technology can actually work, or this new paradigm of doing the work in open science can actually work. If we narrow it down, and in my view, try and find a way to develop, use it where it can best be used first. Why tackle a most difficult scenario when we can tackle somewhere where it can be used, open science can be used first and the best. And if you'll let me go on, I'll tell you what I think is the best use of open science.
Yeah.
So,
we definitely thank you for that introduction. We definitely interested to learn sort of the core thesis, and then definitely I think that's what you're alluding to is like why did you pick this particular indication, and you think that's like I understand you guys are running a big experiment, which is very exciting, also maybe a bit scary. But walk us through the core thesis and why you guys picked that indication to start that with.
Well, first off, I know you've been very interested in open science, and anyone who's listened to some of your other podcasts know you have an interest in open science. But maybe I'll take 2 seconds just to, try and give an idea about what open science means to me, because I think open science is one of these things that is often in the eye of the beholder about what it means. To me, open science is the idea that you do not patent IP, you share the results of your experiments promptly, quickly. You share as much as possible all the information, the intellectual property you developed, etc., and you share that out broadly to as many people as possible. The idea being here is that if you do this, people will do it back to you. And, this may sound like a little pie in the sky, hopeful stuff, but a little later on, I'm going to give you some fairly concrete examples of the kind of collaborations that we've been able to have taking in this. But the experiment to us is, okay, you're doing this as open science. You're sharing all your results, because if anyone has ever been involved in biotech or drug development in any shape or form, you know that the intellectual property and the patents are, in the classic model, are what you own. And the idea of a patent being, I take a basis of knowledge or discovery, and I turn that into an asset. And because I then can own that asset, I can commercialize it. And it's the basis of all capitalism. I can own something, it's my property, and I have the right to maximize my profit from it. And it's a very successful model. I mean, it's the reason I'm able to drive a nice car into work every day, or whatever the case may be. But there are extremes to this, and to a certain degree, we run into it quite often in the biotech model or the drug discovery model. The cost to doing drug development, I can pick up a bunch of papers and I can come up with numbers, but I think generally people are very comfortable saying that, to do drug development from ground zero to something that's registered in North America or Europe or Japan, the big markets for sale, is something between $250 million to $500 million. We can argue over it all depends on what kind of drug you're developing, et cetera. But we're talking big multiples of hundreds of millions of dollars to go all the way there. Now, if you're dealing with something that is a large market, if you're talking about statins or high blood pressure drugs, et cetera, where these are drugs that there's a huge aging population that has a need for these drugs, and they're going to be taking these drugs for a very long time. This market can be very profitable and works very, very well. You take your $400 million cost of drug development, you add on another $100 million of sales costs, but you have a huge base of future customers who can then pay over a long period of time. You can be very profitable. This starts to fall apart, unfortunately, when you start about looking at smaller and smaller disease groups, patient groups. And this is very common now in cancers and other diseases. One of the great things that has come out of the Human Genome Project from 2000 and what we've discovered over the last 18 years since those dates is that what we used to think of as just one disease is actually a series of smaller and smaller disease groups, disease populations. And this is very common in cancer, where we find that it's actually, a very specific mutation in this group gives you this type of breast cancer. A different mutation gives you a different type of breast cancer. A different mutation gives you a different type of breast cancer. And whereas we've been giving people very powerful chemotherapies before to address all of these subpopulations, now the idea is, well, maybe we can actually target these subpopulations and make more effective drugs, make drugs with fewer side effects, etc. And has led to great success in drug development, making the patient's experience better and the outcomes better. But then you get into smaller and smaller. As we get more and more knowledgeable, we start subdividing these groups further and further. And some of the examples, and one of the examples we're looking to work on is, for example, this terrible disease called diffuse intrinsic protein glioma, or DIPG, because so I don't stumble over that too many times. I am in finance after all, so all these medicinal names sometimes make me fumble around a bit. But anyways, with DIPG, you're looking at, in North America, a patient group of maybe 100 patients. And it's generally children under the age of 14 who develop this, or even much younger, who develop this. And once it's identified, it's uniformly fatal, and patients have 12, 18 months of expected survival. It's a very painful, it's very painful on the families, and it's very sad. But in the historical model we have, how do you develop a drug for a patient group of 100 people? Do I take this $200 to $500 million project, and do I spread the cost of development and a profit I want to make? Do I spread it over, 10 years of patients, so maybe 1,000 patients? So I'm looking at $250,000 to $500,000 per regime just to make back my costs. This is not, the model starts to break down. Our technology has come so far that we understand such small segments of the disease that it's not profitable in some cases to go after these diseases. So I'm outlining a problem that's become more and more understood in the community. And as your listeners or others here, next time you hear people talk about personalized medicine, and we're getting so good at developing, medicines that will track just down to, a small group, and you see that on the news, ask yourself, that's great, but how do I spread the development cost of $400 million across this small personalized group? It's that the historical model starts to fall apart in these places. And this is where we've come to the idea of trying to apply open science against this specific problem. This is a really good place to focus on. And so what are we doing here? Well, we're using open science, meaning we're going to share all our results very early on, as quickly as possible. We like to refer to it as we're trying to become uncomfortably open. And this is a change for not just a lot of scientists who suddenly realize, oh, I can share my results with someone else. I can share what I'm doing with someone else. This is great. But it's also tough on some of the institutions and some of our partner groups, because they have, I get a license agreement from someone, and their license agreement says you won't say anything about this until our institution has a chance to see if we want to patent anything. Well, no, if you want to work with us, you have to agree that you're never going to patent this stuff, that you're going to share it with others, and we're going to help you share it. We're going to do webcasts where we share the information. We're going to point you to conferences where you can present this information. We're going to try and partner with other scientific groups who are going to want to take in the information, add to it, and share it back out. And by doing this, we view that we can apply for grants, we can work with other academic institutions, and we can actually work with a
Mm-hmm.
large number of commercial entities that want to do this and help. And I'm going to give two very quick examples who we're very proud to be working with right
Yes,
now.
please.
Charles River, who I think a lot of your listeners would know, a very large institution, fantastic operation in drug development, have worked over the last 20 years to become a start to finish drug developer and partner in the industry. Out of their group in Cambridge in the UK, they have actually encouraged their employees, their medicinal chemists, who wish to use some of their free time, or their employees are allowed to work a certain amount of time on some other project they want to work on. They've encouraged us, allowed us to present, and helped with us organize their people, some of their medicinal chemists, to actually do chemistry for us on this. And they are actually making molecules for us in their allocated extra time. And so we have basically
Well,
increased the number of, on this project for DIPG, which is in the early stages, we've increased by 50% the number of chemists just by working with Charles River. And then again, as your audience
nice.
would know, once you have chemistry, you have to screen it against various panels, et cetera. Find out which ones are active, et cetera. Initially active, which ones look good for PK. Well, reaction biology has stepped up and has said that they'd like to help here, and that they've allocated a certain number of assays to help us get off the ground here. And they're willing to do this, provided we add to it and add to the base of knowledge that's out there. Go ahead, sorry. And we've had many academics
I
come
want
to us already. We've only been at this for 5 months. Academic groups out of Tufts University in Boston, or out of Houston, who've come to us and say, we have assays for this target. We've been looking at it for a different use. We're happy to run. These are the results we had, so don't try this. But here's some assays, and we're happy to run some assays for you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I was actually interrupting you, but because really curious about. I mean, these collaborations sound fantastic, and I'm very happy and excited to see that you guys are able to build these bridges now. What I'm wondering is if you could allude a little bit more into the incentives, because that's one thing I've been hearing a lot about is the broken incentive system in science and the publishing industry, publish or perish, and in the commercial side, it's a lot about, well, I have to keep my patents, but I can at some point maybe even finance this whole
Yes.
study. So you seem to have found a way to get at least some of these groups on board.
Yes.
What are they getting out of it, or what's their motivation or rationale? Both maybe the academics as well as maybe these CROs that you mentioned.
So there's a couple things I think that make us attractive to be a partner. The first and foremost is the fact that we are encouraging academic development. We're encouraging academic groups to work together and to share their information. So from an academic standpoint, this is a positive. We're not stopping someone from publishing. In fact, we're trying to encourage them to publish. And as you mentioned, in a lot of the academic institutions, there is a publish or perish view. So we're here to help that. We're here to help share in that. We have raised monies from foundations and from granting institutions. So we do have some money to help some of these academic institutions, maybe do some matching funding and talk to them about that. We're working with a group at Oxford right now to help fund some of their work, who they're doing some of the screening work for us. So we're helping there. We only have a fair-sized budget, so it's not always the best. As I mentioned, from reaction biology and from Charles River, the two that have started to date, but there are others that we are in conversation with. Their employees find this as an interesting project to be involved in. It's unfortunate that this disease, it's a pediatric disease. These are very young children. It's a very small population. It's uniformly fatal. and it's a sympathetic disease. And it's one of the reasons we picked it, because we want to help cure it.
Mhm.
So they have some interest in it to us. But some of the other institutions, corporate institutions, have another reason to be interested. The
Mhm.
target we are looking at is a kinase that also appears to be involved in other diseases that are more
Mhm.
commercially interesting.
Mhm.
And should our work and what we tell people in the public help another disease, help another large pharma learn something about the target they're doing, that's fantastic. We've helped
Mhm.
advance, and we're not looking for any problem. We've helped advance drug discovery in a more
Mhm.
efficient way. We've shared our results so someone doesn't have to duplicate our results. Someone doesn't have to duplicate our errors either, because
Mhm.
I'm going to give you a quick example. In my other corporate life, we were looking at
Mhm.
anti-infectives, and we were looking at another target, which was quite interesting.
Mhm.
And we did a fair bit of research, and we're thinking about going after this target. And a large pharma had a program involved in it for quite some time, and then canceled it. I'm going to say about 10 years ago, they canceled it. And we were surfing around trying to figure out from the public information why they canceled it, why they stopped, etc. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, we decided not to proceed because we figured the large pharma knew something, and what we were about to do would just be a waste of money. Now, we'll
Mhm.
never know. We may have actually had a different idea than the large pharma did. We don't know why they canceled that
Mhm.
program. If we hit a roadblock in where we're going with DIPG and the ALK2 protein, which is our target,
Mhm.
if we, at the end of the day, we hit a roadblock that we can't overcome, we'll have told people out there this is the result of that path, of the work and the
Mhm.
choices we made. This is so you don't have to go down this path. You don't have to
Right.
waste the money again to do this path. We went
Right.
down it and it did not work. And this is the result
Right.
that we had, and this is what we did. That adds to the value that's there as well. But stepping back
Right.
again, we are already getting information from large pharma who have looked at this target
Mhm.
for a completely different disease,
Mhm.
and they've already told us, by the way, you should also look at the off-target effects here of this, of this similar kinase. And we had this problem here. They've already, this has not hurt their program. They're seeing our
Mhm.
program, but they've told us and they've saved us. Hey, by the way, you should look at this because we had an issue with this, and they've done
Right.
that just because we are doing something that's sharing, and the view is that we may well help them. In
Right.
fact, we have invited them to listen into our monthly um, project meetings. We are putting
Mhm.
out our project meetings where we go through the compounds we've made, the results from the screening, etc., what compounds to make next. We're doing this publicly as a webinar so that others can see what we're doing close to real time. So there's
Mhm.
that. But this is all the great part about sharing information and hopefully reducing the cost of drug development. But M4K Pharma is still a company. And the
Right.
business model, and this is the next piece of it, and this is part of the big experiment, is we still think we can make this as a profitable business. And the question becomes how.
Mhm.
And so one thing that's unique about drug development versus other industries where you have patents and you're trying to do that is there's a regulatory process. You cannot sell a therapeutic in North America, Europe, or almost all jurisdictions across the world without having a regulatory approval.
Mhm.
Now, if you have regulatory approval, you get certain exclusive rights for your compound use, even if that compound is not patented.
Mhm.
You get in North America, or in the United States rather, if you come up with a therapy for an orphan drug,
Mhm.
which is basically, is deciding that this market is very small. the FDA will give you regulatory exclusivity for 7 years. So whether you have a patent or not, for 7 years, you will have exclusivity to that. You will also,
and that's after.
sorry, that's after regulatory approval. And if it's pediatric, they're going to add on another 6 months. Now, even if you aren't going after an designated orphan disease like we are, even if you aren't doing that, if you have a new chemical entity, you get 5 years of exclusivity anyways. These are very valuable. These are actually more valuable than having a patent. In the European Union, orphan drug exclusivity gets you 10 years plus another 2 years for pediatric use. Japan's 8 years. Canada, you have 6 years of orphan drug exclusivity plus 2 years, additional 2 years on data exclusivity. So these are quite long periods of time. And you have to understand, for most drugs that are approved, at the time you finally get regulatory approval, you only have about 11 years of patent life left. So in fact, you're only losing 3 or 4 years off of this. Now it's 3 or 4 valuable years, but you still have exclusivity. People from the outside who don't fully understand the pharmaceutical business, there's a couple things in life that are true in the pharmaceutical business. You may have a patent. You will think this is the best patent. Your lawyers will put together the greatest patent you can. The day after your exclusivity expires in the United States, a generic company will send you a letter, and you'll be notified that they're attacking your patent, because the exclusivity is more valuable than the patent. Now, you may defend yourself against the patent attack, et cetera, but that exclusivity is very, very valuable. A lot of people with patents find out very shortly after their exclusivity periods expire that their patents aren't that great. So we take the view that you can keep back certain clinical data. The data you generate in clinical trials, you can keep that back. That data that goes into your regulatory packages, we will copyright that. And that will be our property, and therefore we will have regulatory exclusivity. The science beforehand, we're going to share. We have no problem sharing that science before, but some of this very specific data around the regulatory package, we intend to hold back, so that we can keep that and use that exclusivity to be able to actually sell the product in the market.
Yeah. So Owen, that's a really, really interesting core point, I think, that you just mentioned around how do you protect yourself and how can you still make money. And I just want to, I guess, understand. You now said that the exclusivity might even be more valuable than the patent. Right? The patent can be attacked. The exclusivity expires. Telling me, as a really a newcomer here, what is if this is true? Like, why isn't everyone doing what you're doing? Because it seems like the benefits you were able to generate, even just in these, I don't know. You said you started M4K Pharma about a year ago. It seems like you've already established important collaborations, both with commercial entities as well as scientists, people wanting to pitch in, people telling you about things to look at that's probably going to save you a lot of time and money because you're not going to repeat errors. You seem to get a lot of benefit, which hopefully, my understanding is, will actually reduce the cost of developing and actually reduce the time as well. Of course, as a trade-off, I might give up 3 to 4 years of exclusivity, which you say is a bit weaker, maybe even. So what's sort of, if this is so great, I guess, why aren't more people doing it? Are you guys just the first people who nailed down the formula, or are there other problems or things that we haven't covered yet?
There are other issues and as I said, this is an experiment. So there are a couple big questions. And this is also one of the reasons we picked this specific disease or diseases like this. So if I was a regular company, say I was going after something with a very large market. Say I was going after, a non-opioid pain killer, which is a very important discovery that we need out there today, and a very large market, especially into an aging population. If I was developing that and I was putting all this information out, a large pharma could quite simply just sit back, watch what I'm doing, and then once I've de-risked the project extensively, go ahead and then start the project and beat me to the FDA. So I refer to this as, if you've ever watched the Tour de France, you have the breakaway group that's out there for 2.5 hours, and then the peloton comes zooming by them at the last couple seconds. If you used open science and it was for a very large market, another pharmaceutical company or other biotech company at the very end could swoop past you. They might say, oh, they've come up with something really interesting, they're really close. Why don't we make a molecule that we can get our own little bit of patent space around that's similar to theirs, but we can come up with something different enough, and we'll pass them at the last second. That could be, if it's a large market, it could be valuable enough to want to do that.
Right.
But they still need to come up with their own compound, because don't forget, we've been publishing and releasing information about our compounds all along, so no one can actually patent that compound. Right. So they have to still come up with a compound. They still have to do all their safety. They still have to do all their other work on that. It's a real expense, but they're going to be doing the last mile of expense, not the very early discovery expense.
Right.
So if it's a large market, they might take that on. But for a disease that attacks, in this case, under 100 patients in North America, there are other diseases, for a disease that's only 400 or 500 patients, they might not do that. It's too small. There's no value to that. So that's one reason we believe it was best to run our experiment first in a disease like this.
Right.
Having said that, it's an experiment, and we're thinking about this problem going forward. We're thinking about, well, how might we still be able to share and have open science and open data and still keep the peloton off from zooming by us at the very end?
Right.
It might end up being that we just have to be a faster sprinter as well at the end, but we'll have to figure that out when we get there. So, but this to me is part of the experiment, and part of the reason, and part of the things we're looking at as we go forward with this program. Got it.
Thank you. What are your biggest challenges now as you're trying to scale the efforts? What are your challenges? Is it the science? Do you have the problem we just talked about building trust? What are some of the things that are particularly challenging now with this new experiment?
Well, the challenges are very similar to any other biotech company for the most part, and those are, the biotech and drug discovery is a scientific process, and you need to do the scientific process. You need to get the right people involved to give the right advice, and and frankly, people who have had near experience to the same problem can add incredible value. People who have been around these issues can really save you the time and energy and cost of going down a path that hasn't worked before. Frankly, open science is really allowing a lot of people to work with us and put that forward to us. There's always the money issue. But I would make the comment that we believe we can do this cheaper using academic institutions. It will go slower because it is an academic institution. It is people doing research. They are on a research timeline. If I go out and hire a contract research organization, they will say that they're going to give me a report at the end of April. Well, if I do that with an academic institution at the end of April, their grad student might have had to go on vacation.
Right.
And that's what happens. So timelines can get a little stretched, et cetera, and you go from there. One thing we are having more time, we're spending more time on, is actually the contracts with institutions. The institutions and be they granting agencies, academic institutions, commercial institutions, etc., their templates are all about you will keep this information to yourself. You will tell us what you have. You'll give us time to write a patent. You'll help us do a patent. All those terms that are in there, we're trying to loosen up. We're trying to help them understand that we can't do that. And you get the usual argument. Well, it's just for us. Well, if it's just for you, and then someone else finds that I just cut this side deal for you, then I've lost all credibility, and no one will ever believe a word I say again. So it's at this stage we have to try and dig in our heels as much as possible and go from there. But at the same time, it's an experiment on the legal side. The legalese language that we're learning and we're using is also part of the experiment. We're looking at how can we share this? How can we share this information, but also make sure we're the central repository for all the work that everyone's doing? Because we're going to need this data and this information as we move forward. And later on, as we make our regulatory submissions, we need to have that data as ours so we can say, this is our data we're putting into a regulatory package. Just because it's ours doesn't mean we don't share it, but we have to at least be able to say it's ours.
Right.
So there are it sounds simple, but when you start scratching the surface of this, you quickly discover how the infrastructure is not set up to be open science. It is set up to everyone wants to own their own information. Right.
It seems like you're doing pioneering work on many levels here. Yeah. So that's very exciting, and probably also is going to take some time to you guys have all the pieces figured out. So I'm curious also about if other people have you seen at all any other groups being interested in learning? Is it too early, and you think people are kind of waiting to see if the model works, or have you already seen people?
Yes. Model? Well, quite a number of academic institutions are really looking at open science. And a number, you're seeing more and more talk about open science. And we're not the first people to think that the cost of drug development is just so high. What can you do to lower it?
Right.
And so we're not the first people to think that open science might be a way to do this. I think the unique part that we've done is to try and turn it into a corporation so that we can aggregate all the work and assign out the work at the same time. I can raise money from foundations or grants, etc., and then act as the hub for getting work done at different institutions, and do it in such a way that the work done at all these other institutions is going down the well-trodden path of drug development. So we're kind of aggregating all the work and moving it forward down the path. We're not, to a little bit of exaggeration, maybe a little bit flippant, but quite often when an academic institution does an experiment and they go, whoa, that didn't work. I wonder why it didn't work. Maybe we should try this. Maybe we do this and that. And they're looking at an experiment that didn't work, and they're just saying, well, this is kind of interesting. Let's look at why this might not. I don't care it didn't work. I'm in drug development. Okay, it didn't work. Next compound. Put that in the mouse. Let's keep this, move it forward. If you want to spend, 2 years wondering about that one compound and that one mouse, that's great. But I need the next compound. I need to keep moving forward here. I'm going down that track. And so there is a different mentality there. And that's what we can try and bring forward as running this through a corporation.
Got it. Okay, very cool. Oh, and I think we're almost at the end. That last question I like to ask my guests is always around looking a bit into the future, or a bit maybe outside of your own field. Is there a technology, a research, or some kind of movement, or anything that has you gotten particularly excited in the last, let's say, year or so that you are learning more about, that you think would be interesting for our listeners to learn about as well? It can be open science related, but it can also be outside of that.
Wow, that's an open-ended question, and and I was going to give such an open-ended answer.
Right.
There are so many interesting things going on in drug development right now. As we move a little bit further away from the old small molecule inhibitory into things like monoclonal antibodies or immunotherapies. I know all these things have huge problems around them, and I look at some of the data, and as I said, I'm a finance person, not a scientific person, but I look at some of the data that comes from these things, and I look some of them look kind of messy to me. But it's really interesting, and people are looking at things in a very different way. And there is a chance for open science to get involved, try and share more information across all these new areas. So this is a terrible answer to a very good question, but I am really swayed by how many variations of different exciting paths there are right now in drug development. I go back 20 years ago, and most of the things I sat through were talking about how to make some chemical entity, how to turn it into a pill, or how to make it into an IV and inject it or make a patient swallow it. And now the areas that people are investigating and trying to discover are just fascinating. So there's my lousy answer to a very good question.
Okay, fair enough. I think we can end on the note that yes, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. It's sometimes hard to keep an overview because every day there seems to be some new approach coming out, and so definitely having open science as one of the building blocks will be great because then people can benefit from these discoveries in different fields much faster, right? And we can apply it to different diseases, hopefully, much faster than we can if we use the traditional model. So,
absolutely. So, if I can just thank you as well for the fact that I've taken a look at some of your recent podcasts, that you've been someone very interested in open science and helping people learn about it. So, I'd encourage people to listen to some of the other open science podcasts you have. They're said by people who don't drone on nearly as much as I do. If you'd like to reach out to myself, I'm happy at Owen, O-W-E-N, at M4K Pharma.com. And you can go to our website and take a look there. It's a work in process for the next several weeks. Hopefully by the end of April 2018, it'll be up and running. And it's also at www.m4kpharma.com. And you're also welcome to reach out and listen in to any of our monthly project meetings.
Great. Yeah. So thank you I was going to ask you about what's that?
You can see how the sausage is actually made.
Okay, great. Yes, very cool. I actually had the chance to listen into one. I think maybe it was your initial progress meeting, and it was very interesting to see all these different parties coming together and discussing science in real time, sort of, and seeing where your efforts are at. So I highly encourage interested listeners in subscribing to your Twitter account or newsletter and something, and then you can see when the next meeting is happening. And we'll make sure to put a link out to your website and your Twitter and all that to make sure that people can follow you and maybe even attend some of these meetings and really learn more about the model and the science and how it's progressing. So, yeah, Owen, I think at this point, thank you for the endorsement of the podcast as well, and thanks a ton for coming on the show. It was a very interesting interview. I think we could go on and talk for hours. We'll have to close it here, and we'll be in touch, and we'll be excitedly following the developments at M4K Pharma and how you're using open science to drive forward the curing of human disease. So thanks again, Owen.
Thank you, and thanks for all your support.
Okay, talk to you later. Bye.